Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to part 2 of how to fire ring your 12 valve Cummins. In this video you'll see the rockers going back on, the studs getting installed, the fire ring getting installed and laid into place, and also putting everything else back together on this. So let's get started and we'll get it done. So we got our head back from the machine shop and got the fire rings all cut in it. Here's what that looks like. So there's the head, resurfaced, fire ring grooves cut into it. And here's our gasket, it's a composite gasket. And there's the rings there. So now we have to prep the block for the head. And we'll probably bump the timing up on this because it's probably still stock. So like, I think these are 12.5, 13 degrees. So I'll bump it up to around 16, and that'll give you some better fuel mileage. The engine will run better, and yeah, just be an overall better performing truck. So now what you want to do before you clean the whole surface right off is just chase all the holes with a tap. There, once you chase all them, then I spray some brake clean down in them, take a blowgun and a rag and blow them all out, and then we can finish prepping the surface for the head gasket. So we got our block all prepped. Now we got to get our ARP studs threaded in. And on the 12 valve, there are 4 different bolts. These ones are the small bolts that are on the rocker mounts. These ones go up through the rocker mounts. These ones go along the exhaust manifold edge. And these ones go on the second row in. So let's get some assembly lube on the bottom of them and get them hand threaded in. All right, so for installing the ARPs, what you do is it comes with a little tube of assembly lube. If you're only doing one engine, then that's enough lube to do the engine, but I bought the bigger can because I do quite a few of them. So what you do is you take the assembly lube and put it and coat it on the bottom of the threads that go into the block. You want to chase all the holes first and then put the studs in. So all you do is just thread them in hand tight. You can use Loctite on them, but if you use Loctite, you have to do your final torque before the Loctite sets. So if you're just putting the studs in and then going to tighten them up the next day, or you don't have time to tighten them, then I wouldn't use Loctite. I just use the assembly lube. So then on the 12 valve, there's 3 different sizes. The short ones go where the exhaust manifold would be. The inner 2 rows are the medium sized one, and the outer row by the injection pump are the longer studs. So your rocker assemblies will go on these studs, and the nut will be on top of the rocker. So once all the studs are in, you can lay down your head gasket. This is what it will look like. So you have your gasket, and then your fire ring sitting there, and then you lower the head on and it'll center itself in the grooves. Make sure there's no dirt, debris, oil, assembly lube, hair, lint from any paper towels or anything like that on the surface, or you'll probably run into some issues. But yeah, lay the gasket down, position the fire rings in the center of the gasket, and then you lower the head on. And I will show you what that looks like in just a minute. All right, so we got our thermostat in, our lift hooks are back on, head's all cleaned up. Make sure to clean the bottom of the head, so then it doesn't have any dirt, any grease, any oil, anything on it, because that could compromise the head gasket sealing. So we have our rings down in here, everything's all lined up, the studs are hand threaded in. So now we just have to lower our head back on. And then there we go. We can start putting the heads on the studs, or the nuts on the studs, and reassemble the rockers and everything. Next thing we have to do is get the rocker assemblies assembled again. So in a 12 valve, when you're studding it, since the nut and the head stick up further than the factory bolt does, you have to get your rocker perches machined. So this groove, this notch, is what had to be machined. The specs for that are in the install instructions in the ARP studs. So what that allows is for the nut and the bolt to, or the nut and the washer to recess down so you can get the valve covers on. But now we have to assemble them, and that's not that hard. All it is just the little snap rings on here, so I'll show you how to do that. All right, so you have your rocker mount here. So it'll sit on the engine like this. So this will be your intake, this will be your exhaust. So your intake is the shorter of the two rockers. Just slides on there. There's a metal shim that goes in here. You take your snap ring. Put it on. And then there we go. There's the intake side. On the exhaust side, same deal. Huh? There we go. There's one. Now you just have 5 more to do. Then once you get that assembled, you're going to drop in your push rods, which are here and here. Doesn't matter which one goes where, they're all the same length. And that rocker will go over this stud. There's a locating kind of lip, kind of like a dowel that goes into the hole. Make sure that is flush. Make sure that sits down in, right like that. And there we go. And you also have to make sure these adjusters are backed off all the way so you don't bend a push rod. The ARP kit came with a new bolt that goes in here for the, just to hold the rocker straight. And it also holds it down and in place and lines it up with here. So you put that in. I think it's a 10 mil 12 point. And you'll take your ARP lube on your brush or the tube that it came with, put it on the base and the threads of the nut or of the stud. Take your washer, put that down, and then put another layer of lube on top of the washer so there's less friction. You basically want it on every surface that's going to rub together, so then there's less friction while you're torquing it and you'll get a better torque. We'll just leave this one like this until the rest of them are back on, so we'll do the other 5. So there we go, all the rockers are in, the push rods are all lined up, everything's hand tight. So now you can start torquing in. Torque spec on the studs is 125 foot-pounds, but you have to do that in 3 equal steps. So first torque, say is 50, or say first torque's 40, then 80, then 125. So then you start in the center and go out in a spiral. So these two, so here, then there, then here, and then just go around in a circle. So you spiral out from the center. Alright, there's 125. Still have to get a heat cycle through it. So get up to temperature and then retorque them, and what that does is it'll crush the fire rings even more. But we got 125 on our studs. We gotta tighten these down. Spec's 25 foot-pounds on those. Adjust the valves, put the injectors in, valve covers on, intake on, hook up the rest of the P-pump, put the stuff together on the front, and then, yeah, get the manifold turbo on, fire it up and get up to temp, and then retorque. So once you have your head all torqued down, we have to set the valve latch. So to do that, you have to find top dead center compression stroke on cylinder 1. On a 12 valve, it's nice because there's a timing pin in the back of the timing cover. I show that in, well, how to set the timing on it. So I will put a tag or a shortcut over to that video. So what you want to do is you want to put pressure towards the camshaft on the timing pin while turning clockwise. And once you feel it pop in, then that is top dead center on compression stroke on cylinder 1. So there, when it's at this position, you can set the intake and exhaust on cylinder 1, intake on cylinder 2, exhaust on cylinder 3, intake on 1, and exhaust on 5. Now the spec is 10 thou for intake, 20 thou for exhaust. So let's get that done, and then we can move on to the next step. So once you have those set, you can pop out your timing pin. So to do that, you usually have to turn the engine counterclockwise a little wee bit because there's some pressure on it. So there, we got that out. So to set the rest of the valves, you have to turn the crank 1 revolution, and that'll turn the camshaft half of a revolution. So then that will put number 6 at top dead center on compression. So to make sure I get a full 180 degrees and I don't go too far, so I don't go too far and not go far enough, I take a paint marker, put a mark on the crank, and then a mark on the crank position sensor. Right like that. Right like that. And then turn clockwise 1 full revolution. It's right there. And in this position, you can set the exhaust on number 2, intake on 3, exhaust on 4, intake on 5, and both valves on 6. So there we go, we got our valves all set, should be ready to roll. Now we got to put the valve covers back on. I have new gaskets for the valve covers because the old ones were all cracked and not in the best shape. Now once you put your heat cycle through it, got the engine up to temp, retorque the head, let it cool down, you're going to have to recheck the valves just to make sure they didn't move and everything's all good. But yeah, let's get the valve covers back on, intake on, fuel lines on, hook the fuel lines back up to the pump, and after everything's put back on, we're ready to fire it up. Before I put the valve covers back on though, I like to put a little bit of oil on the top of the valve springs, just so when you first fire it up, they're not fired up dry. This is an 80-90 bottle, but it's got 1540 in it. It's just a little easier to pour that way. So we got our valve covers on. Now we got to put our intake plenum on and new copper washers and reseal the O-rings on the injectors, and then put those in, and the fuel lines.
paste.
Alright, so now that we have our engine up to temperature, we got to pull the valve covers off again and do our hot retorque on our head studs. So, same procedure, start in the middle, go out in a spiral to 125 foot-pounds. So there we go. Hopefully you found this video informative and informational and helpful if you're trying to do a head gasket on your 12 valve Cummins or even install ARP studs. So, thanks for watching and we'll see you on the next one.